everyone, it's Kim, and welcome to another video by the Entropy System. Today, we're taking on The Crowded Room. That's a kitty cat tale. The show, created by Ivica Goldsman and starring Tom Holland, premiered on Apple TV Plus in June of 2023. It was billed as a psychological thriller based on the book The Minds of Billy Milligan, much to the trepidation of myself. This is not the first time we have talked about The Crowded Room on this channel. We created a video talking about how terrible an idea we thought that a dramatization of the story of Billy Milligan would be. We also did a multi-hour live stream specifically to talk about our reaction to the first 2 episodes of The Crowded Room. Spoiler alert, the reaction was not positive. But we did it. We finally sat down, we watched the whole show, and is it good? Is it bad? Our final verdict is... we don't know what our final opinion is on The Crowded Room. It is such a mixed bag of beautiful, nuanced moments and absolutely atrocious misrepresentation of symptoms. We deliberated for a long time before we finally just decided we cannot make a good or bad stance on this. So instead, we've made a list of 3 pros and 3 cons about the DID representation in the show The Crowded Room. Let's begin on a good note. Pro number 3. The show illustrates how the brain rationalizes DID. One question that I get a lot is, how didn't I know I had DID to begin with? DID is such a big thing, and in hindsight, it seems so obvious, so how did I go decades without knowing about my disorder? While being questioned about how many gaps there are in his story, our protagonist Danny Sullivan says that
people forget things all the time. I just have a not so great memory.
Memory is not infallible, and some people are just more forgetful than others. Our modern understanding of the brain and mental health means that sometimes this can be attributed to neurodiversity or developmental disorders or trauma, but even the most abled neurotypical person is still going to forget things. If a person, like myself, has no understanding of DID or the intricacies of the psychology of being a trauma survivor, how is that person supposed to know that their forgetfulness isn't just on the higher end of normal? When you've experienced something your whole life, that is your normal. And without being expressly told, there's no way for you to know that that's not everybody else's normal too. We also have an altered Jack give an explanation of quantum entanglement.
Do you understand quantum entanglement? It's an emerging theory in particle physics. It suggests that separation is not what we believe it to be. The idea that 2 particles can share characteristics without being at the same point in space-time.
Sometimes with DID, something is just so definitely not like what other people experience that our brain has to rationalize it. DID hides from itself. While it's common for people with DID to think what they're experiencing is just what everybody else is experiencing, there are inevitably going to be some things that they experience that they know is not normal. The brain is going to find rationalizations for these discrepancies, even if the rationalizations are bizarre.
Your mind is extraordinarily good at rationalizing, at unspooling narratives in real time, at making the improbable possible. You've had a lifetime of it.
When some of us were trying to show ourselves to Win thought they were possessed by demons. We also believed when things got weird that we just had an overactive imagination. We were told that by people outside of our system as well, which just reinforced that idea as an explanation for the weird stuff. We have a distinct memory of Win going over to a friend's house and then leaving that friend's house half a day later with no memory of what actually happened. The way that Win rationalized it was, oh, that's weird. Anyway, moving on. As obvious as it is to outsiders hearing this story, to the person experiencing the DID symptoms, it's hard to pinpoint them as DID because the brain doesn't want you to. It's a defense mechanism for specific members of the system to not be allowed to know about the DID. Add that to just a general lack of knowledge of the disorder even existing, and you're going to have people with the most seemingly blatantly obvious symptoms just rationalizing their experiences away as something normal or something just a little bit weird. Con number 3. It's based on Billy Milligan. I already know that there's going to be comments saying that this point is me being too picky because the show changed the main character to be not Billy Milligan and changed a lot of the details of the Billy Milligan story, and really it's only loosely based on truth, but based on the minds of Billy Milligan is right there in the opening credits at the beginning of every episode. It is impossible for people to not know that connection. Making a dramatization of the story of Billy Milligan, even one loosely connected to his story, is troubling to me for two reasons. The first is his story perpetuates the idea that a person with DID can do monstrous, terrible things and then just not be held accountable for it. We're going to get more into that aspect of things in just a little bit. The main reason that this bothers me, though, is because Billy Milligan has been used as a gotcha in conversations I've had so many times about how DID does not make people inherently dangerous. The idea that people with DID are harboring secret serial killer parts is such a prevalent idea in Hollywood that there are a lot of people in the general uneducated public who think that that is true. And when I try to talk about how no, that's a stupid Hollywood trope that is damaging to me and my community, some people who know just a little bit more than average will say, but look at Billy Milligan. He did inexcusable and terrible things because of his DID. Never mind that his story is one among hundreds of thousands of people with DID who have never committed acts of violence before. Stories that could have been told instead. Heck, you could have even fabricated something totally from scratch with just a DID main character if you wanted to create a DID character that was sympathetic. Portraying Billy Milligan or a character based off of him in a positive and sympathetic light just will never sit well with me. Honestly, if they wanted to tell this exact story, enough details were changed from the source material that they just could have said that this was an original story. There's no reason to rope Billy into all of this. But here we are. Pro number 2. The alters feel three-dimensional. One place that most writers of DID characters fail is making all the alters other than the host two-dimensional and tropey. They feel like half-developed imaginary friends and not real, actual three-dimensional parts of a human person. But since the show committed to being a mystery for the first few episodes, they needed the audience to believe that Danny and his alters were all independent, autonomous human beings. By extension, they had to flesh out all members of the system to feel like fully autonomous human beings. And this worked to the representation's benefit. A lesser story would have had all the alters just be kind of generically spooky or weird, or have alters with jobs that only existed to fulfill that job. This is the violent alter, this is the sexy alter, this is the smooth talking alter, and the alter will only ever be that one thing. But in Danny's system, the violent alter Yitzhak is gentle and caring. We see him in violent altercations when the system is in physical danger, but we also see him caring for the system afterward, making sure the wounds are cleaned and that everyone is emotionally soothed after as well. We see him setting strict rules and boundaries for what is and isn't allowed in the house so that they can avoid dangerous situations.
No parties in the house, no sex in the house, no drugs in the house. Follow the home rules, and you'll be safe from those bullies.
He's not mindlessly violent, he's fatherly. Ariana, the hypersexual alter, isn't just a sexy, risk-taking bad girl. She longs for connection, she falls in love, she cries, she feels lonely, she has a beautiful platonic friendship with Danny. And jobs in the system aren't just strictly assigned to one alter or another. The alter Johnny both takes on physical altercations and sexual relationships to protect the system when he needs to, when he happens to be the protector that's closest to the front. While certain alters might have skills better suited to the job, everyone is working to protect the system. And each alter does have a specific set of skill sets. You can easily pinpoint why each alter would have been created and what situation the brain meant for them to handle. Social confidence, escaping bad situations, human connection, physical protection, and so on. But the alters are all more than just what the brain created them to do. They are all just as full and complex as Danny, the host. And as an extension of this, the whole system is so beautifully human and messy. Nobody in the system is just good or just bad. They are all complex and flawed. They have good intentions with actions that might cause harm. Even in their most toxic moments, we see that their hearts are in the right place. They just don't have the tools to be better. It's so very real and raw and nuanced, and I really, really love that. Con number 2. The show is anti-system responsibility. The whole plot of The Crowded Room is centered around the idea that because Danny did not commit the crime of shooting a gun randomly into a crowded area, that he should not be held responsible for those actions.
To send Danny to prison for a crime that one of his alters committed would be the same as you going to jail for a crime that I committed.
At least they don't try to say that he should just go free. They say that he needs intensive professional mental health care rather than jail, which, like, true, yes, that is a much better path for somebody who is acting this way as a result of trauma than just locking them in a cage would be. Professionals that are helping Danny in this show insist that Danny is innocent and it would be unfair to punish him for someone else's crime. This leads to a couple problems. Firstly, it makes Danny the real alter and the other alters the fake alters. Since it was a fake alter who committed the crime, the real one has got to be innocent. I wonder if Danny shot the gun, would they have fought as hard for Mike or Johnny or Jack and insist that they shouldn't be held responsible for Danny's actions instead? Probably not. It also goes against a core tenet of DID functionality, which is system responsibility. System responsibility simply means recognizing that when one alter in a system does something that is less than ideal, the whole system is responsible for it. It's an idea widely discussed and encouraged in pro-healing circles of the DID community. It can be hard to accept for some, especially with systems who still have high amnesic walls between parts, but it is a key part of healing. Recognizing that one alter's actions is the whole system's responsibility means recognizing that you are all active parts of one disconnected consciousness. Separating yourself from any alter's actions means further separating those disconnected parts and increasing the walls and dissociation between parts of your brain. These parts may be disconnected, but it is all part of one mind. So at the core of it, if one alter is capable of murder, that brain is capable of murder. There's not a free pass for the rest of the system. It's on all of you. Now, listen, I understand that the Billy Milligan story was groundbreaking. Multiple personality disorder wasn't even acknowledged by the American Psychiatric Association until a few years after his trial. And yet he became the first person in history to be found not guilty by reason of insanity based on the disorder. It propelled multiple personality disorder into the public consciousness like never before and led to a huge boom of diagnoses and public conversations about MPD. He wasn't the first public case of DID, but he was definitely one of the most widely known, in no small part because the public was outraged that someone could do the things that Billy Milligan had done multiple times and just be found innocent of it all. It set a precedence that people with DID can be dangerous and not have to take responsibility for it. There's a way to tell this kind of story that doesn't frame this mindset as correct. And by doing so, frankly, it just adds to the stacks and stacks of Hollywood misinformation and misrepresentation about DID. Pro number 1. The inner world. The artistic choices made to depict this system's inner world are, frankly, phenomenal. For those who don't know, an inner world is a visualization tool that many systems use to create a place where all of the members of the system can meet in the mind together. Some systems have to focus on it like an active meditation. For some systems, it's a place that's passively built and held onto by the subconscious, so it takes no effort on the system's part to maintain it. And in some systems, there are one or two alters whose sole job it is to create and maintain this inner world. For everybody everybody else to access. No matter how it's created, many of the details of the inner world are often dreamlike and symbolic. For Danny and his system, their inner world is the barn where much of Danny's childhood trauma took place. Since the whole system spent a lot of time there growing up, it makes sense that the brain would have latched on to the details of that place as where the altars would be most active. The way they represent an altar going to the front is a beam of light coming through the barn window. Whichever altar is in control of the body will stand in the square that is that beam of light and enact the movements that the body would then replicate. Some altars can be very close to that beam of light, influencing the actions of whoever is standing in it, giving them suggestions or telling them to stop doing what they're doing. Some can watch passively from the background, and some can just go to the other side of the barn and not pay attention to what's happening in the outside world. When Danny's not fronting, he does exist in the barn, but he is only ever sleeping. In many systems, there are altars whose job is to not know about the DID, and they almost always have very limited access to the inner world, if any at all. Having Danny present in the world acknowledges his place in the system as a fellow altar, while also showing why he would be unaware of the other altars and the existence of his inner world to begin with. We see areas of the inner world being utilized for system meetings. They have a round table of sorts, conjuring chairs and sitting around to discuss what the system's future is going to look like. It reminds me very much of the system meetings that I have with my own system in our inner world. Our old inner world used to be an island, and we would have meetings around a little fire pit on the beach. Our current inner world is a city, and we have a specific meeting room in our apartment complex, fitted with enough comfy floor cushions for all of us to attend any meeting that we have. There was one moment where I was very worried that they just shattered all of the awesomeness that the inner world representation has when Jack pulls out a gun and shoots Yitzhak, who suddenly disappears. I thought they were going to go with an altar just killed another altar, implying that altars have the ability to die, which is not true. You can't just murder part of your own consciousness, even a disconnected part. But then it's very quickly revealed that Yitzhak is not dead, he's just dormant. We're shown extensions behind the barn where altars that Jack has basically shut down now exist, but exist in dormancy, unable to get up and interact with the rest of the system and influence the front or the body. And this instantly went from, oh my god, why did they do this, to, oh my god, that's so cool that they did this. Many systems, including my own, have an altar who is a gatekeeper of the inside. An altar who has a much, much higher level of control over the system than any of the other altars. Ours specifically can control who has access to seeing what's happening in the outside world, who can or cannot front at any given moment, and even what parts of the inner world we're allowed to access. In Danny's system, his gatekeeper has the ability to force altars into dormancy when he thinks that they are endangering the rest of the system. And that is just so DID. I wouldn't change a detail of their inner world. I think it is just perfect. It's great. I love it. It feels very relatable and nuanced. I think that they nailed that just so perfectly. Con number 1, hallucinations. So let me get this out of the way up top. Yes, hallucinations and delusions can occur as part of DID. Not always, and it's not part of the diagnostic criteria, but it can be part of the DID experience. I have experienced both. We have had physical and auditory hallucinations as part of flashbacks. We also had an altar for a while who carried the delusion that she was a completely separate being than the rest of us. I'm not saying this kind of thing never happens in any capacity, but the scale to which they portrayed the hallucinations of Danny is wild. Throughout his entire life, up until he is confronted with the fact of his DID from his therapist after he is already incarcerated, Danny believes that all of the altars in his system are external people who live and move autonomously through the world, who interact with other humans separately from him, and do not overlap with his existence in any way. They absolutely didn't have to do this. The show never says that this is odd or a rare occurrence or not the way people usually experience DID, but just the way that this specific system happened to cope with their symptoms. They were just focused on trying to make it so the audience wouldn't guess that it was DID right off the bat. And the commitment to this mystery honestly just ruined any shot they had at being solid DID representation. DID is already confused with schizophrenia by the masses. The majority of people out there think that multiple personalities or split personalities is a symptom of schizophrenia rather than a completely separate and unrelated condition. And it ruins moments that could have been so fantastically representative of the DID experience. There's a scene where Danny is finally making the move on the girl he likes so much, and while he's kissing her, Ariana kind of gently pushes him out of the way and takes over the physical interaction. Within the realm of understanding that this is DID, it is so DID. Being excited to finally experience something yourself while you're in the front and then just kind of having the brain shift you out of the way and having to watch from the background while somebody else gets to experience this thing that you wanted to experience for yourself, feeling robbed or jealous. That is a very DID thing. Whether he knows he has DID or not, this could have been a very DID experience, but it's undermined because the writers don't want the audience to guess that she's an alter in a system. And it's not even something that the uninformed can write off as just being a part of the dramatization of the story, because the story insists it's based on true events. The writers are saying, hey, this is a dramatization of how things really were. And so people are going to think that that's how DID really is. Misinformation like this not only continues to confuse people about an already misunderstood disorder, but it can also prevent people from realizing they have DID and seeking help because their experiences don't at all line up with the representation they're seeing that is supposedly based on facts. The show tone shifts so many times, starting out as this like weird murder mystery thriller and then turning into a character study and then turning into a courtroom drama. It ultimately hurts the show's storytelling as a whole. If they had picked one tone, I personally think the character study would have been the coolest, and ditched this mystery idea at the beginning, they could have landed so solidly as positive representation. But they didn't. And so they weren't. In the end, I really can't say that The Crowded Room was either solidly good or solidly bad. There are some systems who love this show, and I get it. The good parts are really, really good. There are some systems that hate this show, and I get it. The bad parts are really, really bad. And then there's the statement that Tom Holland made to Vanity Fair that just left me with a gross taste in my mouth about having a meltdown of just wanting to get this character off him, and how the emotional journey of being Danny Sullivan was so intense that he had to take a year-long break from acting. Really just kind of felt like an unintentional slap in the face of people who actually live with this disorder. Like, glad you can shake it off, buddy. None of us have that option. I do think that the show was ultimately well-intentioned. It was clear by how much they lightened the severity of Billy/Danny's crimes. They wanted a story that made the audience sympathize with the main character. And I truly hope that it softened people's hearts towards trauma survivors and those who live with DID. But hoping for those good impacts is really all I can do. It's definitely not something that I would ever recommend or encourage other people to watch. It just exists as a story that definitely was a story. What are your thoughts on The Crowded Room? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you have the same kind of mixed feelings we did? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you to everybody for watching, and a big thank you to all of our patrons who support this channel and make content like this possible. An extra big thank you to Sarah G, Sarah Beers, and Will Mitchell. If you'd like to help support our channel and even help shape the content we make in the future, a link to our Patreon is in the description below. We have tons of fun incentives like suggesting and voting on topics for us to cover, a private Patreon-only Discord server, and even a monthly Zoom call. And until next time, remember, you are loved, you are valuable, and you are valid. Bye!